My name is Tony Bangert, founder of Performance Labs, and today we are discussing a topic that I think any broadcast or media organization is really thinking about, which is trust in media. We are hearing about it all the time. So today we're going to be discussing we'll be looking at current trends and some research that we'll be sharing, kind of shifting our thinking for how we kind of rethink the one-to-many to the one-to-one conversation with our viewers. And then we're going to share a new approach that KHQ here, who's joining me, will be taking. And I want to welcome Annie Quisenberry from KHQ, Director of Business Development, along with Neil Bowling, who is the president of both KHQ, as well as their Fox, NBC, and ABC affiliates. So just to set up the kind of the thinking of where we're going to go here today is, trust in media is at a bit of an all-time low. That being said, media is really lumped into one category, and it's not just one category. It's comprised of local broadcasters, national newspapers, magazines, and lately, social media, which we know isn't always getting a great name for themselves at the moment. So before we dive in, Annie and Neil, would you like to just introduce yourselves real quickly?
Sure, Tony, you did a great job. I run a bunch of TV stations and along with their associated websites and streaming properties in the Northwest. And I have been here at KHQ with the company for about 15 years now. And I started with KHQ as news director.
Thanks, Tony. Happy to be here today. I'm the Senior Director of Business Development, like Tony mentioned, and that means my role is dedicated to exploring and finding non-traditional revenue streams to diversify our income across our broadcast organization.
So thank you both. One of the things that KHQ is doing, and we'll get to this here in just a moment, but you're really taking a very cool, interesting, innovative approach to building community, building engagement. Of course, the first KHQ signal went out back in 1952, if I'm not mistaken. And that means you've built decades of trust with your local communities. And before we kind of dive into the approach that you're taking, Neil, I'm going to share my screen and I'll have you walk us through some of this research that you've pulled together and some of the drivers for why you're taking this approach at this moment.
Sure. Well, it's an honor to be with everybody today. And like Tony mentioned, we've got basically two bits of research that we were able to see in 2024 that have informed this approach. I'm going to start with a media landscape study that was performed by Smith Geiger on behalf of the Washington State Association of Broadcasters. All TV and radio stations in Washington saw the data that you're looking at right here. It pertains to the state in Washington specifically, but I'm sure that you can find similar trends maybe where you are. So this slide, there's a lot going on here. It basically asks respondents to compare how their use of different media platforms has changed over the previous year. The yellow highlighted horizontal bars show where local media sit in this kind of continuum. It was encouraging for us to see that local TV is held up pretty well despite the acceleration of cord cutting. But the researchers who presented this study were really quick to point out that we haven't even seen the tsunami of streaming and social behavior that's yet to come. And yet this chart already shows that the social and streaming platforms have already taken a hold of the audience's attention. The next slide reveals the perception of truth of news here in Washington. Local newspapers lead the pack, followed by TV and then radio. It's no surprise that the networks would follow after that. Fox doesn't run a national news program on the local affiliate, so that's why you don't see those guys represented. It's interesting to me to note how NBC is last amongst the networks, and I believe that that's because the audience sometimes confuses MSNBC, the cable network, with NBC News that we would air here at KHQ. One has a slant, the other tries not to. Now, the age and demographic perceptions are consistent on this slide, but take a look at the divide between conservative and liberal viewers. conservatives are much more likely to be skeptical that our audiences are hearing the truth. I personally had many conversations with members of this community who kind of back that up and point to Fox News as the standard bearer for truthfulness. This has downstream effects when it comes to our local audience perceptions. For example, KHQ is an NBC station, but we also produce the news for the local Fox affiliate in town. Our research and feedback tells us that the conservative viewers are much more likely to believe the local news on Fox, even though the product is virtually the same as what we produce for NBC. So a couple of challenges there just with our network affiliate partnership. We could go to the next slide. It basically points to the perceptions of news organizations and where they fit on this spectrum of political bias. If it's above the middle horizontal line, it's considered highly factual. If it's to the left of the middle vertical line, it's considered left-leaning, and the opposite for that space to the right of the line. I drew a little purple arrow to show you where TV sits. If I had my druthers, we'd be at the top of that vertical line, but at least we're in the neighborhood. I don't think any of the data here would surprise folks, particularly since our political biases are now so tied to how we perceive truth, right? So that brings us to trust in local news specifically, which when weighing the factors, really only 36% of respondents trust local news overall. That's a wake-up call and a big warning sign for all of us in the TV realm. Now I'm going to mix methodologies here and research studies. I'm going to go to Magid research that was also presented to us in 2024. This slide basically shows that despite all of the rapid developments for the social and streaming platforms, local TV news still attacks the mass audience as if we're in the year 1985. We might narrow our focus and try to go to a younger demo of 25 to 54 adults. But by and large, we're still, doing the shotgun approach with how we disseminate the news. And it's no wonder that our audience is shrinking as a result of that. So the next one really points to the fact that there are 4 audiences instead of this one mass audience. You have the fanatics, which include Gen X and boomers. These guys are our loyal yet dwindling fan club for local TV news. The legacy audience also includes the Gen X and boomers. They're just slightly less passionate about local TV. The disengaged kind of skew younger, Gen Z and millennials. The news depresses them, so they've unplugged. And then you have the disgruntled, which is now the largest segment. These guys are the ones most skeptical of the news that we're giving them. The next slide kind of shows this breakout a little bit. The gray bar is the disgruntled, and you see that they're burnt out of following the news, or they're actively avoiding the news. And the other groups are considerably smaller in all of this. So the idea here is that we have to re-engage not only the disengaged, but the disgruntled viewers, and that part is going to be a lot tougher. That's why I kind of gathered this next example from the platform formerly known as Twitter last week. You can see that it follows the plane crash that happened in DC. Someone has pointed out that CNN has a timestamp on their article from before the crash happened. So it's a conspiracy that CNN knew this crash was going to happen and was ready to go with the coverage. Well, Community Notes correctly points out that Google has had this timestamp issue for years. But then we have this comment on the right there that it doesn't matter to this person who believed all along that media has been in this united effort to brainwash and destroy the fabric of our society. And this seems preposterous, but we get so many similar comments on our local social media sites. So we're quite familiar with these disgruntled viewers. All of this to say that trust is a precarious thing right now for local TV and local media in general. We desperately need to change our approach from this one-to-many model that we've supported for so long and start engaging with the individual audiences. But this is not for the faint of heart.
Neil, on that point, can you give us some insights into, it's a challenge for your teams to manage those interactions. What's your approach to managing these conversations, especially on platforms that you don't even own?
Right. Well, it starts with the content that we're actually posting, and there are a few challenges here, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. This first slide that you're seeing here is a sampling of a pair of Facebook posts that KHQ made on the same day last week. One was an AP story about the plane crash and how the Trump administration is handling it. The other was about an issue of major importance in our community here in Spokane about homelessness and giving support to these folks. You can see that the plane crash story had way more engagement. The problem is this isn't local news. It is, however, guaranteed to fire up engagement, so that's why we posted it. So it doesn't feel like we're really winning the platform when you're posting relevant news of community interest because Facebook's algorithm isn't built that way. It's also a problem that we post these stories and then forget about it. None of the 300 comments that you see in the plane crash story are from us engaging and asking questions. For one thing, we don't want to get in the middle of a political debate. And for another, we tend to have a little bit of thin skin and we don't like reading nasty things about us. But I would argue that choosing to post this when it's not local is like pulling the grenade pin and then enjoying the popcorn while you watch the carnage. How is this advancing our relationship with the community? I'm not being critical of our folks at all. They're playing the game as they know how it needs to be played, but is this the right game? The next example is a little bit more broad. This is actually a competing organization in town. They started about 15 years ago. They're really an interesting case study, I think, because it's basically a group of scanner hounds that run this thing. They post anything that comes across in the scanner traffic, and they've really conditioned our audience here in Spokane to go to this site anytime they hear sirens. It's like, oh, I hear a fire truck, wonder what's happening, and they'll go here, and this site usually delivers for them. People then also contribute their own news tips. So breaking news, which has actually been our legacy is in the TV realm for a long time, has been basically ceded to these guys. And I think it's partly because journalists are held to a higher standard of fact checking. And I'll give you an example of that. Here's a post from Spokane News. It's basically a suicide attempt, or what turned out to be an attempted suicide attempt. So it's the comments, though, that are kind of interesting. And that's the next slide. Turns out that Spokane News was wrong about where this happened. They got the address wrong. The moderators corrected it. Now, when we correct things, especially on social media, generally it's not as easily forgiven. The idea for us is that the error was somehow intentional. So it makes it very difficult for legacy media to compete with these local upstarts because we better be right every single time. Another interesting thing, and it kind of relates to Spokane News, that happened a couple of years ago, oddly involving a different suicide attempt. There was a person who was attempting to jump from a parking garage. And this is not something that local TV news would cover at all, mostly for the ethics of the situation. And a small group of the people on Spokane News Facebook site were taking them to task for doing this, for essentially live streaming something that is taboo. But I was really struck because a lot of the comments were actually supportive of what Spokane News was doing and accusing legacy media of censoring or filtering this type of content. Therefore, what we're posting can't be trusted. So again, our own standards are kind of held against us.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you build an audience based on the shock and awe, the scanner fodder, right? But then you combine that with not having the same journalistic integrity that your producers, reporters are held to, and of course further perpetuates the overarching media can't be trusted thinking. There's people behind who's doing this at your stations, and I think anybody on the broadcast side of things that has been doing this for a long time. We know that it's harder to find producers. There's lots of influencers out there, but can you tell us a little bit about, your talent composition? How are you thinking about shifting your thinking around what does a producer look like today versus 10 years ago?
Sure. I think the hot buzzword anywhere right now is influencers. It's not just producers, but, like we lose out now on anchor talent or reporter talent because the young up and comers are like, hey, we want to be an influencer. And I think we need to kind of define what an influencer really is. And in my mind, there's different types, right? There's the content marketing. These are the people that are recommending products and services based on their own expertise and experience. For the news world, though, I'm really struck by this new crop of news influencers who basically repackage video and clips by legacy media and explain it in a different way to the audience. I really think that we, in particular, legacy media of any form, kind of needs to take a page from this book in order to connect with the younger audience. Teach them something, listen to their questions. It's a format change, but these news influencers are digging deeper and often moving faster than how we can move. For example, there's a woman on TikTok who's making multiple videos anytime anything about Brian Koberger, who is the accused Idaho student murderer, which happened here in our backyard. She breaks down what his defense is claiming regarding cell phone tower or genetic genealogy or any reports on what did or didn't hold court. And then she selectively responds to comments on these initial videos by then making more videos. And then I think of another example in the news realm. It's more of the weather realm. One of the companies that sells weather computing products has this new, rather lucrative business model where they sell light versions of their software to retired on-air meteorologists or burned out weather anchors. So these folks can now leverage the relationship that they built with their audience into a direct pathway. So the question is, why don't we do any of this stuff now while they still work for us, right? Well, the challenge there is because our existing talent really doesn't produce the way they consume. But you can absolutely do all of this without compromising your journalistic integrity. With all the different influencers, you still need to keep that separation of church and state with the FCC mandates and so forth and general ethics. But we have to figure out to really get to your question, how to bridge this divide of the modern influencer and getting our folks to consider themselves in that vein while still conforming to the highest ethical standards that we have there.
One to many versus that one to one, right? We've got to think differently about who we're speaking with, and of course doing it with the journalistic integrity that those viewing expect from local broadcasters. Question that I had prior before I sidetracked us, but there's a little bit of research before we get into what KHQ is doing to build community, to create engagement, to really foster that trust within their community. But of course, you've identified challenges with social media, and it's many different challenges that are hard to solve. But kind of how are you thinking about it, and what is this research that I'll share here done to kind of guide your thinking around how do we build a community that resonates with those in our community?
Sure. Well, I'm going to go back to a different element of the same Magid research that I was talking about earlier. And this really gets to the heart of how we built our approach. There's one factor that they found that defines how you build a connection with your community, and that's using our voice and providing a platform for viewers to use their voice. So that's what you're seeing with feelings on community there on the slide. It all kind of boils down to this issue of voice. So what is community then? Well, the next slide is basically the 6 different aspects when viewers who are unprompted say, what is community? it's kind of these different aspects: local and relevant, togetherness and unity, support and helpfulness, inclusivity and diversity, safety and trust, and activities and events. Well, these are all things that, local media is all about, but we're really not making that direct connection, again, because of our kind of mass audience approach to all of this. So Magid pointed out to us that consumers really want this integrated media brand, and we don't have a real effective communication pathway to achieve that. When in the next slide, you're going to see like the main ways that the audience chooses to use their voice is through these digital participation vehicles like Reddit, for example. Nextdoor is not on the list, but they're a great example of this. People want kind of this virtual town square where they exchange their voices, and that kind of community can flourish. But local news, our products aren't really doing that to engage. It's too broad. So we need to have a better platform to have this effective share of voices. And we didn't have that until now. And that kind of tees up the next approach, or this approach that we've taken. And it all comes down to a simple word called cord. And there's a lot to unpack here.
This is a very unique way to think about how local stations can build that community. Having worked in broadcast a large portion of my career, I just find this a very, very fascinating way to build that community. Annie, we've got a couple of slides to showcase this cord community, but we'll first start by asking, what's a cord community?
Yeah, so Cord is a hyper-local online community that's designed to connect people, organizations, and businesses within our region. It's where locals can come together and share stories, exchange ideas, and engage in meaningful conversations. You can kind of think of it, like Neil mentioned, a combination of Reddit and Nextdoor, and even Facebook groups that are more interest-based, but on a hyper-local level. It's backed by NonStop local KHQ, so it's run kind of by our station behind the scenes, but includes voices from across the community on a variety of topics outside of news. By developing this online community and fostering connections with this audience, Cord really helps position NonStop Local as more than a news provider. We become a go-to source for regional life. Our vision for Cord is really 4 things. 1, to deepen audience relationships. Like Neil talked about, traditional broadcasts, news websites, and apps are those one-to-many, one-way mediums. Cord creates a space for interaction, and not just interaction on news content like we get on our brand's social media platforms. Cord creates, it gives community members an opportunity to share their voice on whatever topic they choose, and it allows us to listen more effectively across a variety of topics to what matters to them, and then in turn determine whether we need to deliver more content that they're expressing they want.
So talk us through this this slide here. Kind of what are we looking at?
Yeah, so on this slide, you're seeing screenshots of KHQ.com. So if anyone in the webinar wants to go to KHQ.com with us, you can kind of play with this live. On the left-hand side, you see a widget, a vertical widget, and that's a universal widget across our website. If you click on any of those icons, it will slide out the live Cord interface. So users on our website can actually engage with Cord at any point on our website. It makes it a seamless transition between staying informed and engaging on Cord.
So a social media platform, localized, controlled, owned by your station, which I think is something that we need to lean into given the state of the social media giants right now. And this here is kind of the main hub, correct? This is the Cord Community KHQ hub?
Right. Yep. It's the hub. It's kind of the point of entry to the community where you can see a running feed of a variety of content from a variety of users across the community. And then you can dive into various areas of the community, whether you want to go see the types of groups that we offer, very similar to the Facebook groups construct. You can choose a topic that we call subcommunities, or you can go directly into a group pertaining to a specific interest.
I think what's fascinating here is, to your point, yes, the station is managing a number of communities, but these organic communities are starting to crop up around liked interests, health and wellness, hiking, which of course is big in the Pacific Northwest. Any insights that you've seen from some of these community-built organic communities here?
Yeah, I mean, there's some topics that are bubbling up with more interest from users. We recently started a group called Weather Watchers, and being in the Northwest, weather is a very popular topic right now, and that's been one of our fastest growing and most engaged groups. We're also seeing our users create groups. So any member of Cord can create their own group and start building a following around it as well.
Very cool. So the kind of walk us through a few of these screenshots here, and give us your insights on how you're leveraging the platform socially.
Sure. So one of the keys to success is making sure that we're promoting Cord through all of our channels. So the screenshots you're seeing, that top one is on our swxlocalsports.com website with the little Cord kind of talk bubble graphic. And then that's a screenshot from Facebook where we're promoting some podcast content that we're distributing on Cord. And then the last one is the masthead from our biweekly e-newsletter. So we're actively promoting it to our database as well.
So, of course, we all know we've built massive audiences on some of these social giant platforms, and we'll continue to rely on them for promotion. But the idea is to use those channels to get the audiences back to you versus living on those social platforms where your team is managing what can become a cesspool of comments in many cases.
Right. And one of the benefits of Cord too is that, we own that data. Instead of having to pay for data that we're generating for someone else, it's now, first party data that we own and we can use to create personalized content and new revenue streams, which I think we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute.
This screen here, this is a great example of how you're thinking about incorporating talent, incorporating community, but streamed by way of the Cord platform versus broadcasting live through your traditional channels. Can you give us kind of an overview of how this came together?
Right. So this is an example of interactive podcasting. So we are doing more and more podcasting as we come up with topics that we think will be relevant and of interest to our audience. But we have a studio at the station that we're using for this. And this is a podcast called Leslie's Lowdown on Life. And Leslie Lowe is our chief forecaster and a brand ambassador for KHQ. And, she's really popular because she has such a genuine nature, but the audience also thinks that she defies aging and they want to know all of her secrets. So that's kind of given her a natural platform to tell all. And so she is starting a weekly podcast about aging gracefully and wellness and all types of different topics. And we're seeing it gain a lot of traction by getting news and weather talent involved.
Tell me a little bit about the Spokane Golfers group here.
Yeah, this is just another example of how we're inviting in community voices. Before we launched the platform, we went out and recruited around 20 business leaders and community influencers and incentivized them to host groups through sponsorship opportunity. So Spokane Golfers is one of those who already had a good following on other social platforms. And so it's just a member of the local community that started a group on Cord.
So going back to Leslie's Lowdown, can you give us a deeper look into how are you thinking about using your talent, leveraging your talent to, we know, our local celebrities and trusted? What's your vision for kind of how this expands beyond Leslie and into more of your on-air talent getting involved?
Yeah, well, each of our talent have their own audience and their own interests, and we want it to be embraced more organically by them. Some of them are more thrifty, and some of them have a band, and some of them, we want it to be kind of organic to their interests, just like Leslie has a passion for wellness. So we can see in time developing more opportunities for people to engage with our talent on things more in their personal life, even if they're willing to share. We're also taking this approach with other community partners. So, for example, there's a group on Facebook that's really popular here locally called Spokane Food Finders. It has over 100,000 members. And we're exploring a partnership with them because the founder of that group is really interested in expanding his audience outside of Facebook and leveraging KHQ's reach. And we would love to expand our audience through his reach because we're not sure that there's a huge amount of crossover in those audiences. Plus, food is a great topic. We want to make sure we're celebrating and spotlighting all of the great things our local food scene has to offer. So we see more opportunities for kind of community podcasting as well.
Love that approach. It's very, very smart. So a couple of quick questions left here before we wrap up. The first one is, we talked earlier about influencers and, to your point, Annie, building audience. How do you go beyond that example and think about engaging more influencers in your community, encouraging them to build their own audiences on the platform? What's the longer tail approach here on the influencer side of things?
Yeah, I'll be totally transparent. One of the challenges we've had is the motivation, because these influencers have spent years building their following on other platforms that there's now a monetary benefit to them. And this platform being so young, we're not there yet. And so it's more what we can do to, give visibility if they have a business, supporting local, giving them a platform to share their expertise. So those are some of the things that we've found have been attractive for getting more influencers involved on Cord.
I like the thinking of that cross-pollination. Everybody has an audience now, so how do you collectively come together to help one another? I'm sure there's plenty of influencers that would love to have an opportunity to expand their audience through the platform, but very, very fascinating approach. The last thing, and of course, this is on every broadcaster's mind, and of course, you've got to build audience before you can monetize. But as you think about leaning forward, what are your thoughts on how you might monetize this, how you might use this platform for your sellers to engage local community business owners and become a part of this community?
Right. So there's a few monetization models at play. As the technology stands today, I mentioned sponsorship. If any of our participants are on the platform, they'll see graphics in some of the page headers. So those are sponsorships that can be sold today. You can do things like sponsored posts that can be pinned to the top of pages for whatever duration you sell to an advertiser. Another thing that we're looking to fast track is actually hard coding some ad units into the community and then connecting them to an ad server so that you could traffic direct sold or programmatic campaigns. One thing I didn't mention with our podcasting is that we're taking a branded content angle with even an affiliate marketing approach. So in the podcast, we're bringing in local businesses, spotlighting them based on what's relevant to the topic, and then driving our listeners to their business and then looking at potentially some kind of revenue share from that outcome, as opposed to a traditional, sponsorship or, 30-second video ad model. And then the last thing, longer term, we'd love to see this platform have a self-service order management system built into it. So businesses, advertisers can go on and configure and manage their own campaigns directly.
Well, with that first-party data, that becomes more attractive to those local business owners, right?
Exactly.
Very, very smart. We've covered a lot. I think this is a really, really interesting way to think about how we need to shift our mindsets as broadcasters to really engage the community on a much deeper level, just outside of standard social channels. You guys have put a lot of work into this, I know. And any insights that you can give to the audience around how do you even get started? How do you start to think about building something like this for your station?
Well, it starts to me with just the idea of listening. If you're going to engage with your audience, if you're going to use your voice, you better start listening to the voices of your audience. And the technology aspect of this has been solved for us. And I'm sure that there's going to be other variants of this kind of direct to one-to-one communication vehicle outside of main social media. But broadcasters, we're going to have to really kind of shift our approach and start thinking about uh, where our audience is coming from instead of just here's the news and you're going to take it and we're going to go from there.
Any any last parting words that you could share with the viewers on ways that they could get started or start to shift mindsets within their organizations to start thinking around community versus one-to-many thinking?
That's a great question. I mean, I guess it just starts with the leap, right? I think we all know that our model is antiquated, and we've got to grow and adapt and be our own disruptors. Um, and that's scary, I think, for a lot of folks that sit in my position. But we're gonna die off. So why not dip your toe in and start experimenting with this kind of direct communication with your audience and let them hear their voices and broadcast those voices back to everyone.
Annie, Neil, thank you both for sharing a bit more about trusted media, how you're going about, thinking about not today, but a number of years out to help our industry continue to thrive. Thank you all very much and hope you have a great rest of the day. Annie, Neil, thank you.